The smell of roasted pumpkin and cider spilled across the barn floor as Mariah Fletcher felt the hem of her calico dress sweep past the overturned kerosene lamp. And then the world turned orange and hot. She had been spinning in the reel, the fiddles racing, her boots tapping against the worn planks of the barn that her father and the other farmers had raised 5 years before. The harvest of 1884 had been good in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, and everyone who worked the land or drove cattle across it had come to celebrate. The lamp had been kicked over by someone's heel. She never saw whose. One moment she was laughing, her hair loose from its pins, and the next she felt the lick of flame crawl up her skirt. Before the scream could leave her throat, a weight hit her from the side. She went down hard, the wind knocked from her lungs, and found herself pinned beneath a man in his heavy coat. He rolled her, smothering the fire against the boards, his hands pressing the wool down until the flames choked and died. The music stopped. The dancers scattered. Smoke rose in gray curls. When he finally lifted his head, she saw his face for the first time. He was young, maybe 25, with dark hair falling across his forehead and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His jaw was set, determined, and he did not let go of her arm even after the fire was out. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was steady, though his chest rose and fell fast. She shook her head, dazed. Her dress was scorched black along the hem, but her skin beneath felt only warm, not burned. "I do not think so." "Good." He pulled her to her feet, still holding her arm, and looked her over once more to be certain. Then he looked at the crowd. "Someone get water on that floor before it spreads." The men rushed to obey, and Mariah realized the flame had not been entirely smothered. A tongue of fire had crawled along a trail of spilled lamp oil toward the corner where sacks of grain were stacked. Her father and 2 others threw buckets of water until the last ember hissed out, but the damage was done. 3 sacks had caught, and the corner of the barn smelled like burned wheat. Her father turned to her, his face red. "Mariah." "I did not mean to," she said, her voice small. "You were dancing too wild." He did not shout, but his words were sharp. "You are always too reckless." The cowboy still held her arm. "It was an accident, sir." The lamp was already down when she came near it. Her father looked at him, then at the burned corner, then back at his daughter. "We will talk at home." The dance did not resume. People gathered their coats and their children and left in murmurs. Mariah stood in the center of the barn, her dress ruined, her cheeks burning hotter than the fire had been. The cowboy finally released her arm, but he did not leave. "Are you sure you are all right?" he asked again. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. She looked down and saw that her palms were scraped raw from where she had tried to catch herself when he tackled her. The skin was torn in places, and small splinters from the floor had embedded themselves in her flesh. "Your hands," he said, and took one gently. "You need to clean these." "I will," she pulled away, embarrassed. "Thank you for what you did." "I am Cole Ramsey," he said. "I work the cattle ranch west of here, the big spread near the foothills." "Mariah Fletcher, I know." He picked up his coat from the floor. It was scorched black in places, the wool singed through. "I have seen you at church." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Her father was waiting by the barn door, his hat already on. Cole Ramsey nodded to her once, then walked away, his ruined coat slung over his shoulder. At home, her mother fussed over her hands with tweezers and carbolic soap. The splinters came out one by one, each a small bright pain. Her father sat at the table silent, and her younger brother watched from the doorway. "The grain was already spoken for," her father said finally. "We will have to replace it." "I am sorry, Papa." Sorry does not fill a sack. Her mother wrapped her hands in clean linen, tight enough to hurt. "It was an accident, Thomas." An accident that cost us 3 weeks of work." Mariah went to bed with her hands throbbing and her eyes dry. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying did not fix anything. The next morning, she woke to find her hands stiff and painful. The bandages were spotted with blood where the wounds had seeped through. Her mother changed them after breakfast, but the damage was already done. The skin had started to heal wrong, puckered and tight. "It will scar," her mother said quietly. Mariah looked at her palms. The scrapes had been deep, and the splinters had torn the skin in jagged lines. She could see already that they would never be smooth again. "It does not matter," she said. But it did matter. In a town where every girl her age was expected to marry and keep house, scarred hands were a mark against her. She was 21, old enough that people had already started to whisper about why she was not yet spoken for. Now they would have more to whisper about. She did not see Cole Ramsey again for 3 days. When he came, he rode up to the house on a bay gelding and knocked on the door with his hat in his hands. Her father answered. "Can I help you?" "I came to see how Miss Fletcher is doing," Cole said. After the fire, her father's jaw tightened. "She is fine." "I would like to hear that from her if you do not mind." There was a long silence. Then her father stepped aside and called Mariah. She came to the door, her hands still wrapped. Cole looked at her, and she saw something in his face that she could not name. Relief, maybe, or something warmer. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "I am, thank you." He glanced at her hands. "Are those healing?" "They will." He nodded, then looked at her father. "I also wanted to say that I spoke to the men at the dance. I told them the fire was not Miss Fletcher's fault. The lamp should not have been so close to the floor, and whoever kicked it should have said something." Her father's expression did not change. "That is kind of you. It is the truth." Cole put his hat back on. "I will be going. I just wanted to see that she was well." He left before Mariah could say anything more. She watched him ride away, and her mother came to stand beside her. "That was a good man," her mother said. "I barely know him. He came all this way to check on you. That says something." Mariah did not answer. She went back inside and tried to help with the mending, but her hands were too stiff to hold the needle properly. She gave up and went outside to feed the chickens instead. Over the next week, her hands healed slowly. The bandages came off, and the scars were worse than she had feared. The lines were thick and raised, running across both palms like small rivers. When she held them up to the light, she could see where the skin had pulled tight, making it hard to curl her fingers all the way. The women at church noticed. She saw them looking, whispering behind their hands. One of them, Mrs. Calloway, asked outright, "How are your hands, dear?" "They are fine," Mariah said. "Such a shame. They look painful." "They do not hurt." Mrs. Calloway patted her arm. "Well, you are a strong girl. I am sure you will manage." Mariah wanted to walk away, but her mother was watching, so she stayed and smiled until Mrs. Calloway moved on. Cole Ramsey was at church that Sunday. He sat 3 rows ahead with some of the other ranch hands, and when the service ended, he came over to her. "How are your hands?" he asked. She held them up so he could see. "Scarred." He took one of her hands in his and turned it over, studying the lines. His touch was gentle, and she felt her face grow warm. "They will fade," he said. "I do not think they will. Maybe not all the way, but they are not so bad." She pulled her hand back. "You do not have to be kind." "I am not being kind, I am being honest." He looked at her directly, and she saw that he meant it. "You are still the prettiest girl in Cheyenne, scars or no scars." She did not know what to say to that. No one had ever called her pretty before, not outright. She felt her cheeks burn, and she looked down at her boots. "I have to go," she said. "Will you be at the social next week?" "I do not know." "I hope you will be." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her standing there with her heart beating too fast. Her mother had heard the whole thing. "He likes you. He is just being polite." "Mariah, I have been married for 23 years. I know what a man looks like when he is interested. That man is interested." Mariah did not let herself believe it. She had been disappointed before by boys who had seemed interested until they realized she was not the kind of girl who would sit still and do needlework. She liked to ride and shoot and work in the garden, and most men did not want a wife who could outshoot them. But Cole Ramsey was different. He came to the house again 2 days later, this time with a basket of apples from the ranch orchard. "For your family," he said, handing it to her mother. "To replace the grain that was lost." Her mother looked surprised. "You did not have to do that. I wanted to." Mariah stood in the doorway, watching. Cole looked at her, and she saw the same warmth in his eyes that she had seen before. "Would you like to take a walk?" he asked. Her father was in the barn, and her mother nodded. "Go on." They walked down the dirt road that led away from the house, past the fields where the last of the harvest had been gathered. The sky was wide and blue, and the air smelled like dry grass and dust. "I have been thinking about you," Cole said. "You barely know me. I know enough." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know you are brave. I saw that when the fire started. You did not panic." "I did not have time to panic. You knocked me down before I could," he laughed. "Fair enough. But I also know you are kind because I have seen how you help your mother at church. And I know you are strong because those scars would have put some people in bed for a week, and you were out feeding chickens the next day." She looked at him, surprised. "You were watching me. I rode past your place a few times." "Why?" "Because I wanted to see you." He reached out and took her hand, the scarred one, and held it. "I like you, Mariah. I want to know you better." She felt something in her chest loosen, something that had been tight for a long time. "I would like that." They walked for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle and the horses and the long days in the saddle. She told him about her family, about how her father had come west after the war and built the farm from nothing. They talked until the sun started to sink, and then he walked her back to the house. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Yes." He grinned, and she saw that his smile was lopsided, higher on one side than the other. "Good. I will come by on Sunday after church." He kept his word. Sunday after church he was waiting by the wagon, and they went for another walk. This time he brought her a wildflower he had picked on the way, a small yellow bloom that she tucked behind her ear. "You are going to make people talk," she said. "Let them talk. They already think I am reckless. You are reckless." He said it with affection, not criticism. "That is one of the things I like about you." Over the next month, they saw each other every chance they could. He came to the house for supper twice, and her father warmed to him slowly, grudgingly. Her mother liked him immediately, and her younger brother followed him around like a puppy, asking questions about the ranch. Mariah felt herself falling, and she did not try to stop it. Cole was everything she had not known she wanted. He was confident without being arrogant, kind without being soft. He made her laugh, and he did not flinch when he saw her scars. He held her hands like they were precious, and he kissed her for the first time under the cottonwood tree by the creek, his hands in her hair and his mouth warm against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said when they finally pulled apart. "I am already in love with you," she said back. He kissed her again, harder this time, and she felt the world tilt. But then November came, and with it, bad news. Cole came to the house on a Sunday afternoon, and she knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. He looked tired, and there was a tightness around his eyes that had not been there before. "What is it?" she asked. "I need to talk to you." They walked down to the creek, away from the house. He did not take her hand, and that scared her more than anything. "The ranch is sending a crew to Montana," he said. There is a buyer up there who wants 500 head and the boss is putting together a drive. When we leave in 2 weeks, her stomach dropped. How long will you be gone? 3 months, maybe 4. It depends on the weather and how fast we can move the herd. 3 months. It felt like a lifetime. I do not want to go, he said, but I have to. The men are depending on the wages and I gave my word. I understand. Do you? He looked at her and she saw the frustration in his face. Because I do not. I just found you and now I have to leave. You will come back. I will. But I am not going to make you a promise I might not be able to keep. The drive is dangerous. Anything could happen. She felt her throat tighten. Then do not promise me anything. Just come back when you can. He pulled her close, his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. I will come back, he said. I swear it. You just said you would not make promises. I changed my mind. He tipped her face up and kissed her, slow and deep. I am coming back to you, Mariah, no matter what. The 2 weeks passed too quickly. She saw him every day, stealing whatever time they could. He came for supper, and her father shook his hand and told him to ride safe. Her mother hugged him and made him promise to write if he could. The night before he left, he gave her his scorched coat. I want you to hold on to this, he said. It will remind you that I am coming back. It is ruined. It saved your life. That makes it worth something. She took the coat and held it to her chest. It smelled like smoke and leather in him. I love you, she said. I love you too. He kissed her one last time and then he was gone. The first month without him was the hardest. She wore his coat around the house until her mother told her to hang it up before she wore it out. She worked in the garden and helped with the last of the canning, but everything felt hollow. The town felt smaller without him in it. People talked, of course. They always did. She heard the whispers at church, the speculation about whether the cowboy would come back or if he had just been playing with her. Mrs. Calloway asked her outright if she had heard from him. No, Mariah said. The drive is too far out for mail. Well, I am sure he will write when he can, Mrs. Calloway said, but her tone suggested she did not believe it. Mariah ignored her. She had more important things to worry about. The barn where the dance had been held was being rebuilt. The fire had damaged more than just the corner, and her father and the other men had decided it was easier to tear it down and start fresh. Every time Mariah walked past the construction, she felt a knot of guilt in her chest. Her father noticed. It is not your fault, he said one evening. Everyone thinks it is. I do not care what everyone thinks. The barn needed replacing anyway. It was the closest he had come to forgiving her, and she took it. December came, and with it, the first snow. The wind turned bitter, and the days grew short. Mariah spent most of her time indoors, sewing and mending and trying not to think about Cole out on the trail in the cold. She prayed every night that he was safe, that the herd had made it through without trouble, that he would come back to her the way he had promised. And then, just after Christmas, he did. She was in the kitchen, helping her mother with the bread when she heard the sound of hooves outside. She looked out the window and saw him, riding up the path on his bay gelding, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. She did not remember running outside. She did not remember the cold or the snow or anything except the moment when he slid down from the saddle and caught her in his arms. You came back, she said, her voice breaking. I told you I would. He kissed her there in the snow in front of her whole family, and she did not care who saw. Later, when they were inside by the fire, he told her about the drive. It had been hard, brutal in places. They had lost 3 head to wolves and 1 man to a broken leg, but the herd had made it through. The buyer had paid in full, and Cole had his wages. I bought something, he said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. A piece of land, 40 acres just north of town. There is a creek running through it and good grazing. She stared at him. You bought land. I want to build something. A ranch of my own, small at first, but it could grow. And I want you to be part of it." He took her hand, the scarred one, and held it. "Marry me, Mariah." She felt tears burn her eyes, but they were good tears. "Yes." He kissed her again, and her mother started crying, and her father clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Welcome to the family." They were married the following October, at the harvest dance of 1885. The new barn had been finished just in time, bigger and sturdier than the old one. The same fiddles played and the same people danced, but this time Mariah wore a white dress with lace at the collar and sleeves, and Cole wore a clean shirt and a string tie. Before the dancing started, he gave her something wrapped in brown paper. She unwrapped it and found his coat, the one he had used to smother the fire. It had been mended, the burned patches carefully stitched and reinforced. "I had it fixed," he said. "I wanted you to see that even something broken can be made whole again." She held the coat and looked at him, this man who had saved her and loved her and kept his word. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." They danced that night, her scarred hands in his, and when the fiddles played the same reel that had been playing the night of the fire, he held her close and did not let go. The years that followed were full. Cole built his ranch from the ground up, starting with a small cabin and a corral. Mariah worked beside him, planting a garden and raising chickens and learning how to gentle the horses he brought in from the wild. The land was good, and the ranch grew slowly but steadily. They talked about children, but it became clear after the first few years that they would not come. Mariah grieved for a time, but Cole held her through it and told her that she was enough, that their life together was enough. "We do not need children to make a family," he said. "We have each other." And they did. They had the ranch and the land and the life they had built together. They had long mornings in the saddle and quiet evenings by the fire. They had dances at the new barn every harvest, and every year Cole would take her hand and spin her around the floor, careful to keep her away from the lamps. They grew older together, their hands roughening with work, their faces lining with sun and wind. But Cole still looked at her the way he had that first night, when he had smothered the fire and refused to let go. "You are still the prettiest girl in Cheyenne," he would say. "I am not a girl anymore. You are to me." On their 20th anniversary, they stood on the porch of the ranch house they had built, looking out over the land they had worked and loved. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and Mariah leaned against Cole's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Not having children?" "No." He put his arm around her. "I have everything I need right here." "So do I." They stood there until the stars came out, holding each other the way they had held each other through every hard season and every good one. The ranch was theirs, built with their own hands, and the life they had made was more than either of them had dared to hope for. Mariah thought about the night of the fire sometimes, how a single moment had changed everything. If the lamp had not been knocked over, if Cole had not been there, if he had not been the kind of man who would tackle a fire without thinking, her life would have been completely different. But he had been there, and he had not let go, and she had fallen in love with the cowboy who had saved her. And that, she thought, was the best thing that had ever happened to her. The seasons turned and the years passed, and the ranch thrived. Cole brought in more cattle, and Mariah's garden became known throughout Cheyenne for its vegetables and herbs. They hired help when they needed it, and they paid fair wages and treated their workers with respect. The ranch became a place where people wanted to work, and their reputation grew. On Sundays, they went to church, and Mariah ignored the whispers that had never quite gone away. Some people still talked about the fire, about the girl who had danced too wild and burned down the barn. But Cole would take her hand, the scarred one, and hold it through the service, and she would remember that she did not need the approval of people who did not matter. Her parents grew older, and Mariah and Cole took care of them. Her father's health failed in the winter of 1895, and he passed quietly in his sleep. Her mother followed 2 years later, and Mariah grieved them both deeply. But she had Cole and the ranch and the life they had built, and that was enough to carry her through. Cole's hair turned gray at the temples, and then silver all over. Mariah's hands grew more lined, the scars fading but never disappearing entirely. They were marks of the life she had lived, and she had long since stopped being ashamed of them. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Cole asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, at the dance. "No, before that, at church. You were wearing a blue dress, and you were laughing at something your mother said." "I do not remember that." "I do. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." He took her hand and kissed the scars on her palm. "I still do." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You are a sentimental old man." "I am your sentimental old man." "Yes, you are." They sat there until the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. The air was cool, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, and Mariah thought that this, right here, was what happiness felt like. The years continued to pass, and the ranch continued to grow. They bought more land, expanded the herd, built a bigger barn. They weathered droughts and hard winters and the occasional cattle thief. But they weathered it all together, the way they had always done. On their 30th anniversary, Cole surprised her with a trip to Denver. They stayed in a hotel, ate in a restaurant, and danced in a ballroom with a chandelier that sparkled like stars. Mariah wore a new dress, deep green with lace at the cuffs, and Cole wore a suit that made him look like a different person. "You clean up well," she said. "So do you." They danced until her feet hurt, and then they went back to the hotel and made love like they were young again. In the morning, Cole brought her breakfast in bed, and they talked about the ranch and the life they still had ahead of them. "I want to grow old with you," he said. "You are already old," he laughed. "Older then." "I want that too." They went back to the ranch the next day, back to the life they had built. And as the train carried them across the plains, Mariah looked at Cole and thought about how lucky she was. She had been saved by a cowboy who had refused to let go, and she had spent her whole life loving him. The ranch became their legacy. They did not have children to pass it on to, but they had the land and the cattle and the people who worked for them. When they finally grew too old to manage it themselves, they sold it to a young couple who reminded them of themselves, full of hope and determination and love. Cole and Mariah moved into a small house in town, close to the church and the general store. They spent their days sitting on the porch, watching the world go by, and their evenings reading by the fire. Cole's hands grew stiff with age, and Mariah's back ached in the mornings, but they still held hands when they walked, and they still danced at the harvest dance every year. On their 50th anniversary, the whole town threw them a party in the barn where they had been married. The same barn where Mariah's dress had caught fire, where Cole had saved her and refused to let go. They danced that night, slowly, carefully, and everyone watched and clapped and remembered the story of the cowboy and the girl who had fallen in love over a fire. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not been there that night?" Cole asked. "No," Mariah said. "Because you were there, that is all that matters." He kissed her forehead. "I would do it again. Every time. I know." They danced until the music stopped, and then they went home, hand in hand, the way they always had. Cole passed away in the spring of 1920 quietly in his sleep. Mariah woke up beside him and knew immediately that he was gone. She did not cry, not at first. She just lay there beside him, holding his hand the way she had held it for 50 years. The funeral was small, just the people who had known them best. Mariah stood by the grave and listened to the preacher talk about Cole's life, about his kindness and his strength and his love for his wife. And when they lowered him into the ground, she finally let herself cry. She went home to the empty house and sat in his chair and held the mended coat, the one he had used to save her. It still smelled faintly of smoke, even after all these years, and she pressed it to her face and let herself grieve. But she did not grieve for long. Cole had lived a full life, a good life, and he had loved her every day of it. She had been loved, and that was more than most people could say. Mariah lived for another 5 years quietly, peacefully. She spent her days tending a small garden and visiting the grave where Cole was buried. She told him about the weather, about the people in town, about the memories that came to her in the quiet moments. "I miss you," she would say, "but I will see you soon." And she did. In the winter of 1925, she passed away in her sleep, just like Cole had. The people of Cheyenne buried her beside him, under the cottonwood tree by the creek where he had first kissed her. The headstone was simple, just their names and the dates. But underneath, someone had carved a single line. He never let go, and he never had. From the moment he had tackled the fire to the moment he had drawn his last breath, Cole Ramsey had held onto Mariah Fletcher with everything he had, and she had held onto him just as tightly. Their story became a legend in Cheyenne, told and retold at harvest dances and church socials. The story of the girl whose dress caught fire and the cowboy who saved her and loved her for the rest of his life. The story of two people who had built a life together from nothing, who had weathered every storm and loved each other through every season. The ranch they had built still stood, passed down through generations of families who worked the land the way Cole and Mariah had. The barn where they had danced still hosted the harvest dance every year, and every year someone would tell the story of the fire and the cowboy and the girl who had fallen in love. And every year someone would add, "That is what real love looks like, the kind that holds on and never lets go." Years later, when the people who had known Cole and Mariah were all gone, the story remained. It became part of the fabric of the town, woven into its history like the threads of the coat Cole had used to save her. The coat itself was kept in the Cheyenne Museum, displayed in a glass case with a plaque that told the story. Tourists would come and look at it, at the careful stitches that had mended the burns, and they would read the story and shake their heads in wonder. "Can you imagine loving someone that much?" they would say. But the people of Cheyenne could imagine it. They had seen it, lived it, been shaped by it. The love between Cole Ramsey and Mariah Fletcher was not just a story. It was a testament to what two people could build when they refused to let go of each other. The land they had worked still produced cattle and crops. The creek where Cole had kissed her still ran clear and cold. The cottonwood tree where they were buried still stood, its branches reaching toward the sky. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew through the town, some people swore they could hear the sound of fiddles playing and the laughter of a girl who had danced too close to a lamp. They swore they could see the shadow of a cowboy, his coat slung over his shoulder, walking toward the girl he loved. It was just a story, of course, just a legend, but it was a good story. The kind of story that reminded people what mattered, what lasted, what was worth holding on to. And in a world that was always changing, always moving forward, that was something worth remembering. The story of Cole and Mariah was not about perfection. It was not about a flawless romance or a life without struggle. It was about two people who had found each other in a moment of chaos, who had chosen each other every day after that, who had built a life together with their own hands. It was about the choice to hold on, even when it was hard, even when the world whispered that they should let go. And it was about the truth that some things, Some people, some loves, are worth every scar, every struggle, every moment of doubt. Because in the end, love is not about the easy moments. It is about the hard ones. The ones where you have to choose to stay, to hold on, to believe that what you have is worth fighting for. Cole had chosen Mariah the night of the fire, and he had kept choosing her every day for the rest of his life. And she had chosen him right back. That was the story. That was the legacy. That was what people remembered long after the details had faded and the faces had blurred. Two people. One choice. A lifetime of love, and that, more than anything else, was what made the story of Cole Ramsey and Mariah Fletcher worth telling. Because it reminded people that love like that was possible, that it was real, that it was worth reaching for, worth holding on to, worth never letting go. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The years turned into decades, and the decades turned into a century, but the story remained. It was told to children at bedtime, to teenagers at bonfires, to newlyweds at their receptions. It became a symbol of what love should be: steadfast, unwavering, true. The barn where they had danced was eventually torn down and replaced with a community center, but the story of what had happened there lived on. The museum kept the coat, carefully preserved, and every year on the anniversary of the fire, they would display it in the town square with the story printed on a placard beside it. People would gather around it, reading the words, touching the glass, imagining what it must have been like to be there that night. To see the flames, to see the cowboy tackle the girl, to see the beginning of a love that would last a lifetime. And they would go home to their own loves, their own lives, and they would hold on a little tighter. They would remember that love was not something to be taken lightly, not something to be discarded when things got hard. Love was something to be fought for, something to be nurtured, something to be held onto with both hands, scars and all. That was the lesson of Cole and Mariah. That was the gift they had left behind, and it was a gift that kept giving generation after generation, reminding people of what was possible when two people refused to let go. The town of Cheyenne grew and changed. The dirt roads were paved. The wooden buildings were replaced with brick. The horses gave way to automobiles, and the cattle drives gave way to railroads. But the story of Cole and Mariah remained, unchanged, unchanging, a constant in a world that was always in flux. Because some things are timeless. Some loves are eternal, and the love between a cowboy and a girl whose dress caught fire was one of them. It was a love that had started in fire and been tempered in flame. A love that had been tested and tried and had come out stronger on the other side. It was a love that had built a ranch, a life, a legacy. It was a love that had never let go, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The fire had been an accident, a moment of chaos that could have ended in tragedy. But instead it had ended in love, in a lifetime of love, in a legacy of love that would outlast them both, and that more than anything was the miracle of their story. Not that the fire had been put out. Not that Mariah had not been burned. Not that they had built a successful ranch or lived a long life. The miracle was that Cole had not let go, that he had held on to her in that moment and had kept holding on to her for the rest of his life. That was the miracle. That was the magic. That was the story. And it was a story that would be told for as long as people believed in love. For as long as people believed that two people could find each other in the chaos and hold on, no matter what, because that was what Cole and Mariah had done. They had found each other and they had held on and they had never let go. And that was a story worth telling, a story worth remembering, a story worth believing in. It was a story about fire and flame, and the cowboy who had smothered it with his coat and his love, and his unwavering determination to protect the girl he loved. It was a story about scars and healing, and the way that broken things can be mended and made beautiful again. It was a story about choices and consequences, and the way that a single moment can change the trajectory of a life. But most of all, it was a story about love, real love, the kind of love that does not give up, the kind of love that does not let go, the kind of love that lasts. And that was the story of Cole Ramsey and Mariah Fletcher, a cowboy and a girl, a fire and a coat, a lifetime of love, and a legacy that would never be forgotten.